I pass the stage to Coco, and you can get started.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us on this Desertification Symposium. I'm going to present to you my study that deals with the impact of climate change on rainfall in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the perspective of this study is coming not from the probability side. So we don't ask what is the probability for a change to occur, but from the perspective of plausibility. So we want to know what can happen if we have an event. And specifically, we address the events that are most interesting for us, which are heavy precipitation events. And this will be the topic of the next 3-minute talk. So we know in general that the average precipitation in our area, the Mediterranean area, is expected to decrease substantially because of global warming, because of climate change. But we do not know what it means for specific events. And when I say specific events, I mean the events that are most interesting for us, which are heavy precipitation events, in which, for example, flash floods can occur, or we get rapid replenishment of water resources, such as the Kinneret Lake, and so on. So to answer this question, what can happen during specific events, we use the following methodology. So we get data from global climate models, so global weather models, and we put it inside a weather forecast model, the same model as people use to give the weather forecast. We get the results, which are rainfall fields for an event. So for example, we see here rainfall accumulation throughout one event in 1991. And we can compare these results with observations from a weather radar. Now, what we want to do is to implement the effects of global warming on the same event. And the question we ask is, what is going to happen to the same event, to this heavy precipitation event, if we apply conditions of global warming? So I will just briefly go on one example here. So what we see here on this map is the rainfall accumulation during one event in 1991. This is a heavy precipitation event. We got a lot of rainfall from this event. And what we ask is what's going to happen if this event will occur again, but now with different conditions, the one that are related to the global warming. So this is what we see here. And what we see, the difference between these two events is plotted here. And it shows that in general, we have less rainfall. We get a decrease of roughly 20% in rainfall. So this is true for this event, which is the first out of more than 40 events we simulated. And the conclusions from all of these events are summarized here. So what we saw through this methodology is that rainfall is expected to decrease by roughly 20% in heavy precipitation events in the Eastern Mediterranean. But we also saw that rain rates, the rain intensity, is going to get higher. If we talk about short durations, higher by the same amount, actually, roughly 20%. Also, the events become shorter. They are shorter by 9%. And maybe the most interesting fact is that the factor that is controlling the decreased rainfall is the reduction in the rainy area, which is a reduction of roughly a third of the rainy area for events simulated for the end of the 21st century. So thank you again for listening. And if you want to know more, you are welcome to contact me via email or through any other ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Coco. If anybody has a question, then feel free. We'll take a minute for questions. Otherwise, we can move to the next presentation. And I should have introduced Coco more formally. So you're just coming to the end of your PhD in the Earth Sciences Institute in Givat Ram, correct?
Yeah, this is right.
Is yours going okay? Mine is getting stuck. Is yours getting stuck because of the internet? Yeah.
I think that's not connected to the talk. I had one question. Do you look at any sort of distribution within Israel, or is that sort of change just a general for the country as a whole? Do you have any differences between the north and the south as far as rainfall changes?
So we can see it from this example in these maps, but in general, what we see is a decrease all over the area. A decrease in precipitation, both in the Mediterranean region of Israel, this one, and also in the desert region of this area. But regarding the increased rainfall intensities, then it is not statistically significant over the desert, mainly because there is much variability there.
Thank you very much. And Gal, when you're ready, we're ready for you. So I'll briefly introduce. Gal is a PhD student in the Water Institute at Ben Gurion University, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Isaac, and hi to everyone. I would like to show you two observations from an experiment that was done as a part of a bigger study. This study was dealing with an ongoing problem of nitrate pollution in aquifers. And the main issue in this story is that we do not know the exact amount of how much nitrogen we want to use as fertilizers in order to keep the pollution to minimum, but still keep the crop to maximum. So the research group was considering the different levels of salinity in the available water sources in Israel. We have various water sources, from groundwater to desalinated water, but the main source for irrigation water in Israel is the treated wastewater with a chloride concentration of more than 400 milligrams per liter. But recently we get more and more available desalinated water, in which the chloride concentration is smaller than 80 milligrams per liter. And the research group thought that this is an opportunity to reduce the levels of contamination by nitrate in the aquifers, because chloride is known to have an effect on the plants, on the plant roots, and it affects actually the way that they assimilate the nitrate. So this was the hypothesis that if we use lower salinity irrigation water, we will have less leaching of nitrate because of the effect on the plants. So we had a field experiment that included several treatments. We had in those treatments two different levels of chloride, the high level, high salinity of 350 milligrams per liter chloride, and the low salinity of 80 milligrams per liter. This field experiment included a varezol monitoring system in deep soil. This means that we're measuring water content and solid concentrations in different plots around the field. So the first observation comes from the nitrate concentrations. And here we see a different depth. The depth is on the left in centimeters. And we have here measurements from 8 different plots. The black markers represent the plots that received the high chloride treatment. The red markers are from the low chloride plots. After about 1 year of experiment, we used sprinklers in order to irrigate a large amount of water that initiated the deep infiltration. This deep infiltration is shown here as increasing concentrations in the deep soil, both in 3 meters and 4 meters. What I want you to see here is the difference in concentrations in the deep soil between the two treatments of the chloride. What I mean is that the black markers from the plots of the high chloride show higher concentration of nitrate. And this we only see it in the deep soil, in 3 meters and deeper. The second observation comes from the water content measurements. Here, again, we have 24 sensors of moisture. In the depth is on the left. And the intensive irrigation in the blue area here is shown in these measurements as increasing water contents. Actually, it's the arrival of wetting front, first in the upper depth, a bit later in the second depth, and finally, after 2 or 3 months, in the third depth level. And what I want to focus in here is the arrival times in the deeper soil, and more specifically, again, the differences between the treatments of the high chloride and the low chloride. The black curves from the plots of the high chloride show earlier arrival of wetting fronts. It's not a big difference, it's a few weeks, but still what we see here is that wherever we used higher chloride, we received faster infiltrating water. In the previous observation, wherever we used higher chloride, we received higher concentrations of nitrate. So we had a few theories in order to try and explain what we see. Our hypothesis was that the chloride would affect the plants, but in this case, we saw that it was not valid because our measurements in the plants disproved this hypothesis. So the main theory is related to the story of swelling clays in the presence of chloride. And swelling clays have an effect on the hydraulic conductivity itself, and it also has an effect on immobilization of nitrate within the clays. In more simple words, what we see is that if we will irrigate with lower salinity, we may receive reduced nitrogen leaching and less pollution in the aquifer. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody has a question for Gal, go ahead.
Yes. Gal, thank you. What was the soil type, and do you think this model fit for another soils, or is it more specific to desert soils?
So the soil type is kind of silty less. The experiment was done in Gilat Research Center. So it's somewhere between the coast and the Beersheba less. I think we didn't try it in other places. We didn't have these kind of measurements, but I think it may be valid in other places, yeah.
Thank you. It was a great talk, and I'm going to invite Nevo to continue with the next presentation. Nevo, you are a PhD student in the ecology department, correct?
Yes, correct.
Here at the Hebrew University, and the floor is yours.
Just a moment. Sorry. Something got stuck.
No worries.
I tried to share the screen and it just wouldn't do it for some reason. And I find no solution for this.
Should we hold on? Can you try again now?
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me and see the screen? Okay. I don't hear you.
Everything's good.
Everything's good? Great. Okay, so thank you. And let me tell you about the mystery of CO2 flux in dryland soils. It all started when we measured CO2 flux in the Negev as part of a project that I won't go into here. And we got a peculiar observation, and that in dark conditions, which means there is no photosynthetic activity, CO2 flowed into the ground. So I did a quick literature search, and I saw some evidence for observations from around the world, but I could not find any general framework to explain why and how this is happening. So we decided to build such framework, and we called it the Dryland CO2 influx framework. And to do this, we compiled some mechanisms that were proposed in previous literature, together with some well-known physico-chemical processes. And the main processes here are CO2 dissolution in soil water that decreases CO2 concentration below ground, leading to CO2 diffusion from the atmosphere. And the thermal convection between the soil and the atmosphere can also cause CO2 flow into the ground. And calcium carbonate dissolution consumes soil CO2 and can therefore increase fluxes A and B1 that I've just mentioned. On the other hand, biotic respiration increases soil CO2 concentration, consequently reducing soil CO2 influx. Now, the effects of the environmental variables that you can see in the black arrows and the plus and minus signs are the basis for predictions of what conditions lead to soil CO2 influx. We use two approaches to test these predictions. One is a literature review, and the other is an analysis of our own field measurements. So in the literature, we found that almost all evidence of soil CO2 influx came from drylands, usually with alkaline soil. Moreover, influx was correlated to soil pH levels. In contrast, soil calcium carbonate content was not a good predictor of soil CO2 influx. And perhaps most interesting, influx was detected in both dry and wet soils, and the effect of soil moisture was mediated by soil biological attributes such as soil organic carbon, microbial biomass, or root biomass. Regarding temperature, CO2 influx was related to dropping soil temperature, low soil temperature, or even to soil air temperature gradients. Okay, so in our field measurements, we found that CO2 influx occurred only if two conditions were met. Soil temperature had to be higher than air temperature and to decrease. And we also found that moisture had a positive effect on CO2 flux, preventing CO2 influx. We thought that this is the result of elevated biotic respiration when moisture is high. And we found evidence for this, as microbial biomass had a positive effect on CO2 flux only when soil moisture was high. So to sum up, my main take-homes are that soil CO2 influx is a prevalent phenomenon across drylands worldwide, and that it occurs when the environmental condition induce abiotic CO2 exchange and restrain biotic respiration. Specifically, influx is induced by soil cooling and soil to air thermal gradients, mostly in alkaline soil with poor organic content. And I think that an important lesson that we can learn from this study is that we must consider abiotic contributions to CO2 fluxes if you want to avoid biases in estimating biotic soil respiration and in calculating carbon budgets. And thank you very much.
Thank you. If anybody has a short question for Nevo, go ahead and ask. Maybe you said it, is that what's particular about the alkaline soils that encourages the CO2 influx?
I didn't really get into it, but the thing is that it really favors the dissolution of CO2 in the soil water. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Nevo. Our next speaker will be Daphna Uni from the Hebrew University correct me if I'm wrong, jointly between the Hebrew University and the Weissman Institute. And she's doing her PhD in the plant sciences and the co-convener of this Chavruta group. The floor is yours. You're on mute.
Okay. Hi. Good afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about the fascinating story of acacia trees shortly. So acacia trees are distributed in the most hyper-arid deserts on Earth, such as the Sahara Desert, the Namibian Desert, the Sahara Arabian, and in Israel, in the Arava and the Negev. We focus on the limiting factors for acacia tree, and if we take a look at this acacia tree as a model, you can see that water are transpired from the soil to the atmosphere. At the same time, CO2 molecules are assimilated in the leaves via photosynthesis and help the tree to grow, branches, stem, and roots. And because the acacia tree is part of the legume family, it's also able to fix nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, in root nodules. It's structures where Rhizobium bacteria and the tree are doing symbiosis. And the Rhizobium bacteria take the nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into ammonium, which is the way that plants consume nitrogen, and therefore increase the nitrogen in the leaves. So we are focusing on those three main limiting factors: water, carbon, and nitrogen, how they are interact with each other, and how the atmospheric condition control them. So today, in the short time, I will tell you only one finding that we recently find out about the nitrogen fixation in acacia seedlings. So we took seedlings and we grew them in sufficient nitrogen treatment and deficient nitrogen treatment. It was 0 ppm and 50 ppm. And then we measure the shoot, root, and nodules biomass. The shoot is the green part of the plant, and we saw that there was no differences in between the treatments. Even the trees that got 0 nitrogen in the irrigation got the same shoot biomass. Also in the root biomass, there was no significant difference between deficient and sufficient nitrogen treatment, but the main and the significant difference was in the nodule biomass. And if you want to see how does it look, so this is a root system of, the left one is a root system of acacia tree that got 0% nitrogen. And the white structures are the nodules where the Rhizobium bacteria fix nitrogen. And the right root system is root system of acacia that got sufficient nitrogen treatment. So basically, the tree can regulate the symbiosis with the root bacteria and produce more structures of nodules when there is a need. And those nodules compensate the deficient in nitrogen. So this might be an mechanism for energy preserve in places where there is hard conditions to preserve energy. So this is only one mechanism, and there are more that we investigate, and you are welcome to contact. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question for Daphne? So I wanted to ask, are these results consistent with what's been found in other plants or trees, or is this a first of its kind look at the effect of nitrogen?
It's well known that there is two ways of nitrogen fixation, or consist nitrogen fixation, or how do you say, to regulate. In agriculture, it found a lot that plants are regulating the symbiosis, but not in trees and in natural conditions.
Great, thank you very much. We'll keep moving ahead with Yuval Shmilovich. I hope it's the first time I've had to say your last name, so I hope that
Fine.
Yeah. He's a PhD student in the Earth Sciences Institute in Givat Ram, and I hand it over to you.
Okay. So hi everybody, and thank you, Isaac. So I'm Yuval, a PhD student at the Hebrew University, and I will provide a brief talk about estimating soil erosion risk in dry cropland using an event scale modeling and stochastic rainfall generator. So according to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, soil erosion effects following the global warming may lead to a geopolitical crisis and conflicts that will have an impact on lives on millions in the really near future. In arid lands, rainfall is one of the most important active agents of soil erosion, but the complex rainfall and runoff relationship in arid lands present a great challenge for predicting soil erosion and assessing soil erosion risk. Usually because measurement records is usually too short to capture extreme events, overall, storm scale erosion risk evaluation that take into account extreme events are relatively missing. So the main question for this study is what are the characteristics of extreme erosive rainstorm events, and how severe is the erosive impact of discrete extreme rainstorm. The main approach in this study is to couple a process-based erosion model with a synthetic 300 years storm scale rainfall record produced by stochastic rainfall generator. So this is the overall concept. The first stage is to collect, we collect event-based runoff and soil erosion data from experimental site in Ramot Menashe. Based on this event scale data, we calibrate the DOEP process-based erosion model. After the calibration procedure and by trusting the process-based model in predicting the erosion response of the area, we moved forward to produce long-term and high-resolution rainfall series with appropriate representation of extreme events. We generate 300 years rainfall series at 5 minutes resolution. We spend much effort to make sure that the properties of the synthetic storm is match the statistics of the measured rainfall data in the region. We estimate the erosive impact of each storm using the process-based erosion model. And based on the 300-year synthetic storm scale erosion data, we first estimate the erosion risk, and then we also examine the characteristics of extreme erosion events. Okay, I will go to our main findings. So to estimate the erosion risk, we quantify the erosion return period, which is the probability of specific erosion events to occur in a year. The result showed that the erosion during extreme rainstorm can be up to 9 times greater than the 300-year annual mean. For example, the 100-year erosion is about 0.9 kilogram for a square meter, while the long 100 average soil erosion is about 0.1. We therefore conclude that the multi-annual average soil erosion cannot represent the impact of extreme storms. And we also found that the high and short duration rainfall intensities are responsible and determine the erosion efficiency of the storm. That's it. I would like to thank you for the listening. You can find more detail and a description of the research in a paper that has just been published in Science of the Total Environment, and you can contact me by email.
Thank you, Yuval. Does anybody have any questions? So I wanted to ask how sensitive the results are to the initial experiment that you did, the field results. If those results had been a bit different, will it impact much on the modeling, or is the model itself pretty robust to?
Yes, so we calibrate two main parameters of the process-based model, and they were calibrated against the measured data. So actually we use the measured data basically for calibration. And we also, of course, after we calibrate the model, we perform a validation procedure, leave one out cross-validation procedure, and we found that it's quite, the model predict quite well the events, and we were really, the result was quite robust in terms of parameters, range, and values.
Great. So I'm going to invite Yoav Bendor as our next speaker. Thank you, Yuval.
Okay, hi everyone. Nice to see you here. I'm going to show some results
again. Yoav.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, now we can hear you. All yours.
Can you see the screen? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay, so I'm going to show some results from the research I've conducted as part of my PhD at the Hebrew University. And I'm going to show you how we can use geological archives, such as lacustrine deposits from the Dead Sea, to understand the impacts of climate change on the hydrological cycle. So the rationale for the study is that, we live in a subtropical region, and subtropical regions, they are characterized by substantial variability, which means that every year is usually different from the one previous and the next one. And so understanding hydroclimatic variability is quite important, and it is also related to the aspects that Yuval and Coco mentioned as well. You also know that subtropical regions such as ours, they have limited water resources, and they are expected to become drier as climate change progresses. And for those reasons, it's important to understand climate variability. And the major problem with that is that the amount of data that we have is relatively short. So modern data related to precipitation or flow, etc., usually covers a few decades. And this is not enough to actually estimate how this variability would change with respect to climate change. And then the general idea that is done by the geological community is to use archives, such as lacustrine deposits, to expand our knowledge and basically to increase the amount of data that we have that covers a substantial enough time period so we can understand these processes. And this relies on the basic idea that the present is the key to the past, and in some sense, the past is a key to the future. So the idea is to expand the amount of data that we have by looking into previous climatic changes. And then in our region, we have the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is a terminal lake, which means that its level is correlated with inflow, or let's say total inflow. And it has a unique precipitation pattern where we see more precipitation in the north, and most annual precipitation is dictated by storms coming from the north, whereas floods and debris flows, they are usually coming, at least those that are capable of reaching the central part of the lake. And here you can see this is where the coring was done about a decade ago. Comes from the south. So we have these two aspects, and then basically what was done is that a core was drilled into the central part of the lake. It covers about 250,000 years, starting from our times, going back 250,000 years. And then this gives us, in some unique periods, insights into annual scale and processes. So we have during some of this time period in the past, we have the deposition of annual deposits. And these deposits that you can see here, they are made from the alternations of white and dark laminae, and they record hydrological processes in annual resolution. And then basically what we did is we took these laminae, these laminations, and we analyzed them based on our modern understanding of how climate functions here, together with some insights from climatic models. And basically we were able to interpret something like a millennium and a half, instead of something that's around 1 century of data that we would have otherwise from modern measurements. And we found 2 independent proxies that record annual inflow and flood frequency. And we use them to show what happens in terms of annual frequency, what happens to our region when climate change took place in the past. So if you are interested in that, basically we have a few papers published, and this was the general idea. So we looked into previous climate changes, we analyzed them using these sediments, and then eventually we translated that using our modern understanding of how precipitation works in the region. And I just want to thank the people and colleagues that helped us during this research. And if you are interested in hearing what we found out, then you're welcome either to contact me or to find one of our papers. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question for Yoav?
Actually, go ahead, Nina.
All right, it's a short one and not very related. Have you also found some evidences for seismic activity, earthquakes, plate movements?
Yes. So there was another group of people that focused on reconstructing seismic activity. And I don't have a picture of that here, but we can definitely see that in some cases, for example, the laminations, they were mixed together or folded. And then they used that to interpret seismic activity and also some within lake activity. So I can also send you a couple of papers, but again, it was not my work, it was done by others. So I can I'll send it to you in the chat.
Thank you. What a nice archive.
Thank you, Yoav. I'm going to finish off the series of talks today with my own. So I'm going to talk about soil degradation and hysteresis. When we're thinking about soil degradation, why do we care about hysteresis? So in a nice agricultural soil, we want our particles grouped together in aggregates, allowing for the easy movement of water and air. But in water scarce regions, we often are forced to use water that's high in salinity and particularly high in sodicity content. And that, combined with seasonal precipitation patterns, has the potential to cause breakdown of soil aggregates, which can then inhibit the easy movement of water and air into the soil, which can obviously be detrimental to plant growth. So given the danger that this poses, it's obviously important for us to have models that can help us assess the risk of soil degradation. When I say soil degradation, in this case, we're talking about decreases in soil hydraulic conductivity. And if we have a particular irrigation pattern and known climate conditions, what is the chance that we're going to have a change in soil hydraulic conductivity? the models that are out there right now, and they have one big gaping hole, and that is that they don't consider hysteresis in changes in hydraulic conductivity, meaning they just consider degradation and rehabilitation to be reversible processes, even though our experimental knowledge and field observations have indicated that that is very likely not the case. So the model that we've been developing is the first that is able to consider hysteresis in changes in hydraulic conductivity. So this is just a sneak peek at the results. Here we run a short 2-year simulation that mimics conditions typical in dryland and arid regions. In the white areas, you have the dry period of the year where saline and sodic irrigation water is used. In the light blue, you have the period of the year where there's precipitation. And here we have 3 different models of how hydraulic conductivity changes. In the bottom panel, we have the McNeil model, which is the backend for the Hydra software programs, changes in hydraulic conductivity. And in these first 2 panels, we have 2 different versions of our own model representing 2 different levels of hysteresis. And we can see really different results in the Hydras McNeil model. At the end of each rainy season, hydraulic conductivity just immediately bounces back up to its original value. I should have mentioned, so we're seeing here 1,000 stochastic simulations for each panel. In our model, we have, when we have high reversibility, then hydraulic conductivity does pretty quickly get back up to its original value. But when we have low reversibility, then hydraulic conductivity can remain in a diminished state throughout the run of the time of the simulation. And if we use those results to then assess the hydraulic conductivity at the end of the simulation period, we can see that the results that we are going to get really depend on which model for hydraulic conductivity we used. If we use this low reversibility model, then we will say there looks like a pretty significant risk of long-term soil degradation here. If we used one of the other 2 models, then we would not believe that there would be any risk of long-term degradation. So I think this just emphasizes the need to have models that accurately capture the processes so that we can accurately assess the risk of certain behavior. I give a thank you to my supervisor and the other members of my lab. If anybody has a short question, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I thank everybody for making some time today to join us and to talk about deserts. I hope you enjoyed the talks of my colleagues and really appreciate your attendance. Thank you. Well, I wish everybody a good afternoon, and we'll hope to see you soon. Yehuda, you have a raised hand?
No.
Okay, great. Well, we hope to see you sometime in person soon, and if not, at the 3rd Desert Symposium around this time next year. Wishing everybody a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Isaac.